Okay, so this is the video for chapter 9. We're going to talk about energy metabolism. And so we've talked about carbohydrates, fats, proteins, alcohol, all of these foods that possess energy. And now we're going to talk about how exactly those are broken down, not just through digestion and metabolism, but the actual cellular processes that occur to yield energy from these different types of macronutrients or sources of energy. Okay, so as usual, I will not read you the learning objectives, but there are many. Okay, and on the next slide, I'm just going to introduce you to the chapter. So again, macronutrients and alcohol, which is not considered a nutrient, it doesn't have nutrients besides energy. They are rich sources of energy. Okay, so remember, carbohydrates and proteins yield 4 kilocalories per gram, fats 9 kilocalories per gram, and alcohol 7 kilocalories per gram. So they're all rich sources of energy. All of these have to be broken down first to yield energy, and it's through that breakdown process which energy is harnessed from these types of molecules. Our bodies can't use, glucose directly. Our bodies can't use triglycerides directly. Our bodies can't use amino acids or alcohol directly. Again, first they have to be broken down and they have to be converted into a form that the body can use. And we're going to learn that form of energy is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We'll look at that molecule in just a bit. All of the processes that we're going to look at where these energy yielding nutrients or alcohol are broken down, they are multi-step reactions, series of steps, not just one step that yields energy. It's a series of steps. So we call these metabolic pathways, okay? They're going to occur in all of the cells throughout our bodies. Metabolic processes, these pathways are going to be slowest when we're resting and fasting, and most active when we're awake and active. Okay. Okay. So we're on to the first part of the chapter. And so here again, we're going to focus on metabolism. Again, these are chemical reactions that take place in all of the cells in our body to yield energy. So metabolism, that term is going to be the sum of all of the chemical processes happening inside of our cells that allow us to stay alive. These pathways, these processes are going to allow us to release energy from, again, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and alcohol. These processes also will give us the raw materials that we need to synthesize new substances so we can build proteins, build fats, build carbohydrates from broken down sources. And we also have the ability to excrete waste products that are produced from these processes. So again, these pathways are a series of reactions that occur in progression. There are intermediate molecules that are formed during the steps, and then we end up with end products. Okay, so again, it's a series of stepwise reactions. So metabolism is the sum of all reactions that are taking place, and we have two types of reactions, two categories that reactions can fall into. We have anabolic and we have catabolic. And so anabolic metabolic pathways, this is where we build larger molecules from smaller ones. Okay, these are pathways involved in the synthesis of things like proteins, for example. Protein synthesis is an anabolic pathway. Glucose, fatty acids, cholesterol, and amino acids, they're all building blocks for anabolic pathways. These types of metabolic processes where we're building larger molecules from smaller ones are going to require energy. And oftentimes that energy comes from the reverse process, which is called the catabolic pathway. Okay. Anabolic pathways, when we think about anabolic pathways, we're thinking of growth. Okay, so they're more prominent during periods of growth. On the flip side, the reverse, these are called catabolic pathways. These are going to be metabolic pathways in which larger molecules are broken down. Okay, So for example, when glucose levels in the blood get low, our body will turn to glycogen stores in the liver, and glycogen will be broken down to yield more glucose until it runs out. And we'll talk about what happens next in a little bit. Glucose, we can say, is going to be broken down by a process called cellular respiration, which we're going to get to. And again, energy is released during that process. So these are breakdown reactions. There are also byproducts, right? And so when glucose gets broken down, not only is energy produced, which again, that's ATP, but also byproducts, carbon dioxide, which is CO2, and also water. Okay. Again, catabolic pathways, the energy that is yielded, that comes out of these pathways, can be used to drive anabolic pathways, okay, as well as other things that are happening inside of our cells. So that energy is really important. Catabolic pathways are happening all the time, but again, they're going to be more prominent than anabolic pathways. So at a higher level, they're happening during weight loss or during wasting diseases, for example, cancer, where weight is lost pretty rapidly. Okay, so here we go, just a nice image to go along with our two types of metabolism. So on the left here, we have anabolic reactions. Again, these are our buildup reactions that require energy. And on the right here, we have catabolic reactions, which are our breakdown reactions that release energy. And we can see how the two are interconnected. So for example, on the left, if I'm looking at the first anabolic pathway here, I have one molecule of glucose here, 6 carbons, a second molecule of glucose here, again, 6 carbons. I have energy, ATP. These two will be put together to start to form glycogen, which again is how our body stores glucose. And so that would be anabolic. Glycogen is a molecule made up of multiple glucose monomers. Okay. On the flip side, when glycogen gets broken down, what happens is we end up with glucose monomers, so smaller molecules. And in this reaction where glycogen is broken down, we release ATP. So again, this is a catabolic reaction. This ATP can then be used to drive anabolic reactions. Same thing here, glycerol plus fatty acids, 3 of them, plus ATP is going to give us triglycerides. And when we break down triglycerides, so lipolysis, we release ATP and we end up with glycerol and fatty acids. And we can say the same thing for proteins. So if we're building a protein, that's going to be an anabolic reaction where we put individual amino acids together using ATP. We end up with a larger molecule, a polypeptide or a protein. When we break proteins down, we release energy, ATP, and we also release the individual building blocks, which again are called amino acids. Okay? Okay. So we got metabolism, we've got anabolic versus catabolic reactions. So let's talk about converting food into energy. So again, there's going to be a series of catabolic reactions that are going to take place, which again produce energy as an end product. This is going to happen in cells. It's going to begin with digestion. Okay, it continues. So digestion is going to occur. Smaller molecules like monosaccharides or amino acids or fatty acids, those are going to be taken up into the bloodstream. They're going to be delivered to the liver and sent out to the rest of the body. So this process begins with digestion and absorption, I should say, and it's going to continue when these monosaccharides or amino acids or fatty acids or glycerol or alcohol are sent through metabolic pathways. Okay, and again, this is going to be happening in cells throughout the body. This process of going through a metabolic pathway is going to capture energy, again, as ATP. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So what this molecule is, and I'll show you a picture of it in just a minute, but it's an adenosine molecule, which is adenine and the sugar called ribose, attached to 3 phosphate groups. And there's energy stored in the bonds between the phosphate groups. And again, I'll show you that in just a minute. This is what we say, it's the main energy source for our bodies. It's the energy source that our bodies can use to drive cellular work, to drive anabolic processes to drive cellular transport or anything else in the cell that requires energy. This is going to be the source. Oftentimes we'll call ATP the energy currency of our cells. Our cells cannot use monosaccharides directly, can't use amino acids directly, can't use fatty acids or glycerol or alcohol directly. Those first have to go through this metabolic pathway. ATP is extracted, and then we can use ATP directly as an energy source. Okay? Again, there are going to be byproducts of this reaction. So for example, heat, carbon dioxide, and water are going to get released. Heat helps to maintain body temperature. Okay? So they're not just waste products. They're byproducts, but they're not really just waste products. Carbon dioxide is exhaled. Water can be used for other things. And again, the heat will be used to help maintain body temperature. Thermoregulation. Okay, so this is just kind of an overview showing how we can convert food into energy. And so again, this is called catabolism. These are catabolic or breakdown reactions in which larger molecules are broken down into smaller molecules, and in the process, ATP is going to be produced. Okay, so the first stage in converting food into energy is digestion. So that's going to be the breakdown of complex molecules into their building blocks. Okay, and then we have absorption, and cells will take up these building blocks. The second is really our focus, the conversion of building blocks to what's called acetyl-CoA or other simple intermediates. And so for proteins, these are broken down into amino acids. Amino acids will go through a series of steps, eventually resulting in the production of acetyl-CoA. Carbohydrates, again, through digestion, are broken down into monosaccharides like glucose. There will be some steps here where some ATP will be produced as well as some carbon dioxide, but the product that we're concerned about here is acetyl-CoA. We could say the same thing for lipids. They get broken down into fatty acids and glycerol, yielding acetyl-CoA, and the same thing with alcohol. It is going to not be digested, but be absorbed and then be converted into acetyl-CoA. The acetyl-CoA is kind of the it's where everybody kind of meets. Acetyl-CoA is going to be a 2-carbon compound that could then enter into what's called the citric acid cycle and then the electron transport chain. We're going to talk about all these steps. So again, acetyl-CoA enters into this pathway, into this cycle, I should say, and some ATP is produced as well as some carbon dioxide. And then the electron transport chain is going to yield actually the bulk of the ATP produced in this metabolic pathway. So we're going to talk about these steps in detail, but this is just a nice overview showing you kind of that all types of food kind of meet at acetyl-CoA. Okay, so let's take a quick look at ATP. So again, this is the energy currency of our cells. This is the type of energy that our cells can use to drive any cellular process that requires energy, including anabolic reactions, building larger molecules like protein synthesis. And so here we go. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It's made up of adenosine, which is composed of adenine attached to this sugar here called ribose. Adenine is a nitrogenous base. Ribose is a 5-carbon sugar. And then we have 3 phosphate groups, 1, 2, 3. And so the PI, that means inorganic phosphate. Okay, not a big deal. Just want to make sure I point out everything kind of on here. The bonds between phosphates 2 and 3, so this bond right here, and also, to a lesser extent, the bonds between the first and second phosphate. These are considered to be high energy bonds. This bond right here is the one that's usually broken. Breaking these bonds will release energy, and that energy can be, passed on to something else, used to drive an anabolic reaction or used to drive cellular transport or whatever ATP is being used for. So there is energy in these bonds. We consider ATP to be a form of chemical energy. It's energy stored in the bonds of this molecule that can then be used for whatever else. Okay, We can also call it potential energy because it's stored energy. You can use both of those. Okay, so how does ATP work? Okay, so ATP is going to be formed. Let's do this. ATP is going to be formed here through catabolic pathways. So we generate ATP when we break stuff down. And then for anabolic pathways or anything else in the cell that requires energy, ATP, this last phosphate here, comes off. So this PI, that's inorganic phosphate, when that comes off, the energy stored right here in between these two bonds is transferred. It's used, in this case, to create larger molecules. Okay, so the energy gets passed on. Okay, where's my pointer? So when this last phosphate comes off, we call it the terminal phosphate, we end up with a molecule called ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Okay, we could actually even take off this phosphate and harness the energy here in this bond and generate what's called adenosine monophosphate, AMP. We can regenerate ADP and we can regenerate ATP by adding phosphates back onto the molecule. Catabolic reactions that release energy do just that. They'll add on, one or two phosphates depending on what the molecule is. Okay, so again, ATP is generated by adding a phosphate onto ADP, and that is through the energy released from catabolic pathways. So breaking down monosaccharides, breaking down fatty acids, breaking down alcohol proteins. We're going to generate ATP. And again, ATP is broken down and used to drive anything that requires energy. ATP is constantly being broken down and being regenerated. It's like a rechargeable battery. Okay. Okay, so the key to understanding these metabolic pathways that we're going to get into is that we have to understand what are called oxidation reduction reactions. Okay, so ATP synthesis, when we talk about the phosphate coming off and the phosphate being added back on, that's generating ATP and generating ADP. But in order to generate ATP, there's actually a series of steps that happen in between, glucose, if that's what we're talking about, and ATP being produced. What happens at each of these steps along the way is that electrons are going to be pulled from energy-yielding substances, so like glucose or a fatty acid or a protein or an amino acid or alcohol. So electrons get pulled, okay, and they're going to be donated to another molecule. And then eventually those electrons are going to be brought to what's called the electron transport chain, which is another series of redox reactions that in the end generate ATP. And so before I go into the nitty-gritty of this, let me just give you kind of an overview here. If energy from glucose was released all at once, so if all the bonds between all the carbon atoms were just broken all at once, our cells wouldn't be able to harness energy from glucose. It would be like an explosion, okay? Too much energy. Already the process that our cells do is not 100% efficient. So it would be even less efficient if there wasn't all these steps. So instead of releasing all the energy from all the bonds all at once, our cells have evolved a mechanism for a slow release of energy. So breaking the bonds, slowly, kind of one at a time, okay? And so when I talk about breaking bonds, really what's happening is electrons are being pulled off of glucose in a stepwise fashion, okay? So we say that glucose is oxidized. It's going to lose electrons along the way. Glucose or fats, whatever it is, whatever the energy yielding compound is that we're talking about, it's going to lose electrons, become oxidized in this series of steps. As the energy yielding compound is oxidized, something else is going to be reduced, and we'll talk about what that is in just a minute. Okay, so it's called a oxidation reduction. So what's being oxidized, what's being reduced? Something is losing electrons, something is gaining electrons. And so electrons, again, are going to be transferred from carbohydrates or amino acids or fats or alcohol. And then they're eventually, at the very, very end of this pathway, at the very, very end of the electron transport chain, they will eventually be given to oxygen. Okay? Electrons combining with oxygen, electrons and protons, or hydrogens, I should say, combining with oxygen are going to form water. Okay? And so again, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, but overall realize that this pathway, this metabolic pathway of catabolism, catabolic reaction, is just an oxidation reduction that is used to drive the synthesis of ATP. Okay, so again, these stairs here show this kind of stepwise release of energy through oxidation reduction, through electrons, being taken off of glucose, and stepwise moving towards oxygen at the end. Okay? And again, ATP is made along the way, so energy is going to be made along the way. All right, so let's make sure we have definitions here. So whatever substance is being oxidized, we say that it loses electrons. Okay? I should also tell you that hydrogen ions go along as well. Okay? The substance that is reduced gains electrons. Okay? There will be enzymes at every step of these pathways controlling these oxidation reduction reactions. Dehydrogenases, we've heard this back a few chapters ago, at least when we talked about alcohol, we talked about alcohol dehydrogenase. So dehydrogenases are going to be a class of enzymes that are responsible for removing hydrogens from energy-yielding compounds, okay, with their electrons. I remember oxidation reduction. I've heard both of these. So oil rig, oxidation is loss of electrons, reduction is gain of electrons, or some students have told me Leo the lion goes grr, lose electrons oxidized, gain electrons reduced, whatever one you like better, pick it. It'll help you to remember the difference between the two. Okay. So since we're talking about electrons, I have to introduce you to niacin and riboflavin. These are key players in energy metabolism. Okay, so oftentimes metabolic reactions will require enzymes, and enzymes often require cofactors and or coenzymes. So niacin and riboflavin, these are both B vitamins, and they're going to be cofactors. They are going to assist dehydrogenases, the enzymes that catalyze or control oxidation reduction reactions. Their job is to help transfer electrons, hydrogens, from these energy-yielding compounds, so carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and alcohol, eventually to oxygen in these metabolic pathways. Okay, so what we say is niacin and riboflavin are going to be electron shuttlers. They are going to pick up electrons at various points in the metabolism of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and alcohol. And they're going to carry those high energy electrons from whatever point we're at in the metabolic pathway to the very end of the metabolic pathway, which is going to be called the electron transport chain. And it's there that these will dump off their electrons, and those electrons will be used to drive the synthesis of ATP. So you can think of these as kind of the middlemen. They are, the electron shuttlers. They're picking up electrons, carrying them to the right spot, and then dumping them off. You can think of electrons as energy. Okay, so when the electrons are picked up, they've got a lot of energy. When they get dumped off, they still have that energy until they get to the end of the electron transport chain. That energy is going to be transferred, and they are eventually given to oxygen to form water, which is low energy. Okay? So niacin, the B vitamin involved in helping dehydrogenases, functions as what's called coenzyme NAD. So you're going to hear NAD. NAD stands for Nicotinamide, adenine, dinucleotide. You can just call it NAD. The oxidized form is called NAD+, so that's the form that doesn't have the high energy electrons. When it picks up electrons, it is reduced to what we call NADH. Okay, so NADH is carrying electrons. The second key player here, again, riboflavin, it is going to function as a coenzyme called coenzyme FAD. Okay, the oxidized form is just FAD. The reduced form, when it picks up electrons and it's carrying them, is called FADH2. Okay, these are very, very important molecules. NADH plays a bigger role than FADH2, but we will mention both of them. Okay, again, just to reiterate, their job is to pick up electrons along the metabolic pathway involved in breaking down these energy sources. And they're going to bring those electrons to the electron transport chain, where the energy from those electrons is going to be converted eventually into ATP. Oxygen's going to be sitting at the very end of the electron transport chain, waiting for those electrons, and it will then form water. Okay? So two very important molecules here. So here's just a little figure showing you how these work. So again, NAD+ is going to be the oxidized form. And let's say, for example, this is pyruvate. Pyruvate is an intermediate molecule. It is the end result of what's called glycolysis, which we will cover in just a minute. It results from the breakdown of glucose. There are two of these produced. Okay. And if we're under anaerobic conditions, what will happen is pyruvate will lose electrons to NAD and form lactate. Okay, so here's the important part. Here we have NAD+. It's going to gain electrons from pyruvate, 2 electrons and a proton. It will become NADH. So this is going to be the reduced form. It has gained electrons. It's going to, again, carry those electrons to the electron transport chain. So it's a shuttle molecule. Okay. When it gets to the electron transport chain, NADH is going to release those electrons, and it's going to become oxidized to form NAD+. Okay? Okay. So, I'm going to pause this. We will start cellular respiration in the next video.